Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Happy Thursday, best day of the week. Today, I want to start off with an introduction for tomorrow's special, which I'm very excited about. It's about Marxism in your church and making sure it doesn't infiltrate your church. You know, we've talked for weeks now about all these different philosophies, and we've talked about how Gramsci, as he put it, the long march through the institutions. These progressives, these Marxists, their attempt to not confront and take down our institutions externally, but a decision back in the 60s to infiltrate and take them over and therefore down from within. And we see it everywhere. The long march through the institutions, we see it everywhere. We see it in higher education, clearly, K through 12, Hollywood, math, gender. You think they were gonna stop at the church? They're taking over every aspect of our society. You think they're going to stop at the church, the single most important cultural institution in the country? They're going to take down every single thing, and then they're going to say, "Hey, now on to the church." And one of those Marxists is going to say, "Whoa, guys, the church is pretty important to these people. Maybe we shouldn't. Let's not take down the church. Let's take down gender, marriage, the family, math, science, everything. But the church is a sacred space. Let's let that be." You think that's how that's thinking? No, of course not. Of course they're going to take down the church, and they have. So tomorrow we're going to talk about Resolution 9 in the Southern Baptist Convention. Southern Baptist Convention is the largest Protestant denomination in the country. And I want to make that point because this isn't, I'm not talking about like some fringe, crazy church. Like there's some church that's like the Unitarian Universalist or something like that. And they're so far, like in that church, you have to be a lesbian to be the preacher. It's like they're totally in left field, right? And I'm not talking about those nuts, all right? This is the Southern Baptist Convention, the biggest denomination, Protestant denomination in America. They have, with Resolution 9, welcomed in the Trojan horse that is intersectionality and critical race theory, and people are falling for it, most with good intentions. Do not fall for Black Lives Matter in your church. Listen, you spend a lot of time here, you spend a lot of time on the First, you spend a lot of time in the news and what's going on. You are infinitely more informed than the average person, certainly when it comes to these things. Black Lives Matter, Marxism, and all this stuff. No one else in your church will know what's happening. Do not let the rest of your church members fall for it. You know, yesterday or 2 days ago, we did a segment on these Chinese re-education camps. And I can't stop thinking about it. Just very, very quick of it. So it was about Korean War, American prisoners of war who were in Korean POW camps, and they were like physically brutal. And then a bunch of them were brought to Chinese re-education camps. And we talked about the difference between those two experiences and how the Chinese ran the re-educations. First of all, they weren't POWs, they were newly liberated friends. Okay, so you can see the beginning of the mind games here. But the first thing that they did was to try to get the Americans to say seemingly, meaningless things why you even get me saying this. So they would get the Americans to say, America's not a perfect country. It's true, America's not a perfect country. So they get the Americans to say this, and it's just the foot in the door. They get the Americans to say, communism's it won't work in America, but it's good for Asia, right? So they're not getting the Americans to say, "Oh, communism's amazing." That's not the first thing. No, it won't work in America, but maybe in Asia, it's fine. They'd get them to say unemployment, it's not a problem in a communist country, which is true, I guess, right? If it's not, like employment's not a thing either. So it's like employment, unemployment. Right? So they get the Americans to say these things, and now the devil's got a foothold. And they put you in a really tricky spot, which also ties into what we talked about yesterday, putting you in the double bind. This is what the left does. This is what these Marxists intentionally do, which is what Black Lives Matter is. But they put you in this double bind with the Black Lives Matter, right? So someone's going to say, do you think Black Lives Matter? Lowercase BLM, but they're really talking about uppercase BLM, right? So if they're a Marxist and they're asking you if Black Lives Matter, you can't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Be like, "Oh, I don't support Marxist organizations or doctrine." "Oh, yeah, but Black Lives Matter, right? I think Marxism is a terrible thing, and I want nothing to do with it. In particular, I don't want anywhere near this church. Oh, so you don't think Black Lives Matter? Listen, the fruit of my life answers that question very clearly. But you too, should be against Marxism in every form. Are you? Are you against Marxism? Don't even do listen, of course Black Lives Matter. That's not, because they don't, that's what they want you to say, right? Do you see the trick? See the trick, what they're trying to do? They're trying to get in. All right, this is when the Chinese would get the prisoners of war to say, America, yeah, of course America's not perfect. Gets the door open. Don't play their game. Don't use their language. Don't cede an inch. Name, rank, serial number. That's what you say when you're a prisoner of war. That's the information you give. You give your name, your rank, and your serial number. Don't give them an inch more. Let me give you an example of the Trojan horseness of all this. So people, and if we have time, we can do this later because it's important and we've sort of touched on it before. I know you've heard this before, but if you go to the Black Lives Matter website and you look for what we believe, so just Google what we believe Black Lives Matter, and it'll pop right up and there's a whole list of things. Most people will focus on the comments about the nuclear family and the queer affirming. We're a queer affirming network. And there's plenty to talk about there. But how about the very first sentence? You don't have to dig through the what we believe section in order to find like the one thing that maybe is whatever. The first sentence. Do we have it, guys? All right, read that sentence. It's the very first sentence. What does that mean? That's a weird way to word that, isn't it? We are unapologetically Black in our positioning? What does Black in our positioning mean? And I don't know about you, but I read the what we believe section many times, and I never even noticed that. I think I read it and my brain was like, oh, I know those words, and then just kept moving. Because we've all seen those words before. We've seen the word positioning, but I've never seen them in that order before. We're Black in our positioning. So I think our brains just read it and then just kept going. And we're like, oh yeah, I know what that means. But if you sit on it for a second, you're like, Black in our positioning, what are you talking about? What does that mean? Well, it's a whole thing. And this is what I mean by the Trojan horse. Positioning and positionality is a whole critical theory concept. So we skim over it. You're like, oh yeah, you're Black, so to go back to the church thing. Oh, you're unapologetically Black in your positioning? Oh yeah, sure, come on in. Without being like, whoa, what does that mean? All right, this is from their textbooks. Positionality is the notion that personal values, views, and social location in time and space influence how one understands the world. Again, that's true. People are defined not in terms of fixed identities, but by their location within shifting networks of relationships. That's the intersectionality. Gender, race, class are indicators of social and spatial positions. Positionality is a concept that acknowledges that we are all raced, classed, and gendered, and that these identities are relational, complex, and fluid positions rather than essential qualities. So this is intersectionality. Now here's how it goes on. Are you confused yet? Good, that's the point. And that's their point too. This is all just a bunch of jargon, which we can talk about in a second too. But how this manifests itself is a person, because of their positionality, must constantly, in their words, engage their positionality. What does that mean? That means you have to at all times be aware of how you're oppressed. So to say we are unapologetically Black, capital B, by the way, capital B Black in our positioning, which is a whole other thing too, means that Black is our identity in every way. Because of our positionality, our truth is oppression. That's what determines our truth, and therefore every decision we make, and therefore every action we take, specifically against the oppressors and their truth claims. There is no debate here. Anything that comes from outside of the Black experience is oppressive by its very definition. Okay? Go ahead, bring that into your church. All right? Bring that into your church. See how that goes. Because here's the question. Are you unapologetically Black in your positioning, or are you unapologetically Christian in your positioning? They cannot work together. There's nothing that Karl Marx can teach the church. And there's nothing that can come from Marxism used as an analytical tool to help the church. On this jargon. All of that, I know your head's spinning and my head's spinning too, right? It's all super confusing, and that's the point. It's just jargon. And that's all Marx was too, and that's all Marx wasn't too. It's like this self-righteous, entitled, just like let's just make stuff up. Metabolic rift, dialectical materialism, interpenetration of opposites principles. And you're like, what are you talking about? It's just stupid jargon nonsense, like dialectical materialism. And that's part of the problem with it too. Like if you go to your church pastor and you're like, hey, I'm really concerned about Marxism in the church. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? Oh, well, dialectical materialism says, and everyone's like no idea what you're talking about. That's the point of this stuff. Which is why they boil it down to these seemingly benign sentences like, oh, we're unapologetically black in our positioning. And you read it over. But once you pick up that stone, there's like a whole Alice in Wonderland world of who the heck knows what's going on under there. And it's things you want nothing to do with. There's another term called, it's in their section, their What We Believe section. It's called, we are self-reflexive. And we do the work required to dismantle cisgender privilege. Okay, what? But the same thing, self-reflexive? What does that mean? My brain hurts. We're not going to go into it now. The point is all of these words that we've heard before, but are oddly worded and seemingly randomly placed, there's a whole world there. Do not let this get into your church. We're going to have much more about this tomorrow on our special. What's the special called? It's a cool name. It's like woke, false prophet, the woke religion. We'll do that tomorrow. We're looking forward to it. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We've talked to a couple authors actually whose books have come out at the perfect time right now, and we need to read these so we can truly understand what's going on around us. And one of them is Mike Gonzalez. He's from the Heritage Foundation. His book is The Plot to Change America: How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. Mr. Gonzalez, how are you, brother?
Hi, how are you? It's great to be on with you. Obviously, sad times for the country, but yeah.
Yeah, no, well, I'm glad that you wrote this book so we can get to the root of it. So let's just start with identity politics. What is that first?
Well, identity politics really is the division of America into groups that can be based on race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, gender, even disability status, whatever conveys a status of victimhood that the members of the group can then use to claim attention, respect, dignity, rewards, compensatory justice. In order to do that, the purveyors of this must instill in these members, and sometimes these groups are created by the government, in these members grievances against the government, against society, against America. Obviously, this is not a great way to run a railroad, let alone a country, and we're seeing the consequences today in the summer of 2020.
When did victimhood become a virtue as opposed to whatever the opposite is, like overcoming obstacles, right? That used to be the virtue. When did victimhood become it?
It's been a slow process. There's two social scientists, Manning and Campbell, who've written a book called Culture of Victimhood. Previous to that was a dignity culture, and it was exactly the opposite. You derived your claims on your pride from having overcome victimhood, having overcome problems. We're all faced with problems. Life is not easy. You've had them, I've had them, all of your listeners have had problems. We have to devise ways to overcome that. And then we used to feel the pride in doing that. And that's what was our claim to greatness, was having overcome challenges that life throws our way. Today, it's the opposite. It's your victimhood that gives you this pride, this claim for attention, this claim for benefit. And because of that, it just puts it on a hamster wheel. If you derive pride and benefit from being a victim, you're never going to solve your problem. You're always going to be a victim. You have zero incentive to solve a problem. This is why it is corrosive to society.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Speak a bit, Mike, if you can, about the purposefulness of this, right? Like, I think that's one of the big things that I've been learning, that this is all intentional by these philosophers and certain leaders for different reasons, but this is not like the organic outgrowth of America, right? This is a purposeful directive. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's the reason why I named the title of my book, The Plot to Change America. There are no Thursday night meetings in a basement. But yes, it actually starts with Antonio Gramsci, an Italian communist leader in the 1920s. He gets thrown into prison by the fascists, and he begins to think. They want to stop his brain from working. Bad idea, as we know from the example of St. Paul and many other thinkers. You do a lot of hard thinking in prison. So Antonio Gramsci realizes that Marx had promised constant revolution. The worker was going to rise up and overthrow the bourgeoisie everywhere. It had failed every time since 1848. It only succeeded in Moscow in 1917. So Gramsci comes up with the theory of a cultural hegemony, which means that the worker has become his own oppressor. The worker has bought into the cultural givens of the ruling class, into the family, into the nation state. He's become patriotic, into religion, and into the economic system. In order to have revolution, you must drive off this hegemonic narrative that's in the worker's mind, and introduce a counter narrative. And you do this through struggle sessions. You do this through consciousness raising struggle sessions. An example, a horrible example, is Pol Pot in Cambodia or Mao in China. But another example is Robin DiAngelo, briefing and training 184 members of Congress in an anti-racism struggle session a week ago in Congress. Robin DiAngelo is very open. She says all the time she hates capitalism. Capitalism is bad, and she wants to dismantle it. So it is really a branch of the same thing. But these are, and the second wrinkle that I want to add, and we can get into it, is Herbert Marcuse, somewhat of a disciple of Gramsci, who's now living in the United States. Gramsci was living in Italy. Marcuse, a German, becomes a German-American, immigrates to the United States. And he too believes in this. He says all liberation depends on the consciousness of servitude. You must instill grievances and the feeling of servitude into somebody's mind. But he moves the locus of rebellion from the worker to the identity groups. He observes the riots of the 60s. He was depressed. He thought the American worker was too content, too happy with his Wi-Fi, with his hi-fi, his TV, his refrigerator. But then he sees the riots in the late 60s. He goes, aha, we need identity groups based on race to carry out revolution. Sorry for the long explanation, but that's the long and the short.
No, this is perfect. No, it's exactly what I want. So this is so interesting, this desire for revolution. So I remember reading Marx so desperately wanted it and was certain it was going to happen any day now. And it never did for him, right? It never did. So that's interesting that you touched on the Gramsci too. Why did these guys want this revolution so badly that because it didn't happen naturally, they had to force it?
Right. Well, they think that there is, by the way, I always say that if I want a doctor to tell me I have a late stage anything, I want it to be a Marxist doctor, because they're always saying that capitalism has entered its late stage, its last stage of something. So yeah. I will live forever if the diagnosis comes from a Marxist doctor. Look, we have to not impugn their motives. They see inequality and they want to drive out the reasons for inequality. They want to say, well, we can't have equality of opportunity. We need to have equality of outcome. And for that to happen, we need to level off. Madison famously said there is a diversity of talent. That's the reason why we have property rights, why the founders believed in property rights, because man has a diversity of talent. Communists and Marxists and socialists of all stripes want to level off this diversity of talent so that we all have equal outcomes. The only problem is the steward of the state is the government, so the government ends up with all the power, and we end up in tears.
Yeah. Can you speak to the difference between culture and race in this conversation. This is something that Thomas Sowell has taught me to look at more, are cultural differences, and not, which transcends obviously the petty surface group differences that we're supposed to be, put into.
Sorry, they didn't hear that correctly. Thomas Sowell said the culture of what?
Well, just cultural differences between people, right? We're told that it's all about race, but
Right.
Thomas Sowell's more like, no, they're cultural differences between people that make differences.
Right. I mean, culture, there is an American culture. There is an American culture that obviously within America, there are separate cultures. Italian Americans in Brooklyn or Boston will have certain habits. The Scots Irish in Appalachia will have certain habits. My own Cuban American cousins in Miami will have certain habits. But there is the overlay of the American culture that we should all share. And really, that is the creedal notion that we're all created equal. Starts out with the founding documents. But there are also some habits inherent to the American culture that are not in the founding documents, but that the founders believed in. Hard work, punctuality. These are the things that the purveyors of identity politics tell us now. It's whiteism. These are white traits: to show up at work on time, to have reason. This is really real racism. Reason is part of the human condition. It's what separates the 7 billion of us here on this earth from plankton. It is through reason that we access the fact that the laws of nature, the fact that we have rights. Without reason, we do not understand that we have rights that government cannot take away. And yet, we have Robin DiAngelo and all these racism consultants telling us that rationality and reason are white traits. This is garbage. This is racist garbage. We have tried this before in this country. It has not worked. Why are we trying it again?
Yeah. Last question for you, sir. And you kind of touched on this, but if the plot is to divide us, we need to act against that and try to continue to unite us. So what are things that should be uniting us and have in the past united Americans?
Well, I mean, the central idea in the founding, the central idea that Jefferson puts into the Declaration, all men are created equal, endowed by the creators with unalienable rights. We're the only country in the world that derives its legitimacy from the idea of natural right. We're not pure Lockeans, but the founders adopted John Locke to the conditions of the colonies. That is still a united, it was used by Jefferson, obviously, but then it was used by Lincoln. Lincoln says, Jefferson put it in there for me. Jefferson did not need it to defeat the British. He put it in there for me to come along and did the things that I needed to do. And then Martin Luther King comes to redeem a promissory note, that the promissory note inherent in all men are created equal. I get goosebumps just even describing it. This is the idea, the binding that binds you, whatever your background is, and me, a Cuban American, and all Americans should bind us with these ideals that speak to the best of mankind. We cannot abandon them.
Exactly right. The Plot to Change America, How Identity Politics is Dividing the Land of the Free. It just came out 2 days ago. Go buy it right now. Mike Gonzalez. Mike, always good to talk to you, sir.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate you. So good. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. So again, friendly reminder, I know I keep mentioning this, but I'm really excited about it. We have our special tomorrow, and it's about how Marxism and critical theory and Black Lives Matter is infiltrating the church. Already has, and will continue to. Mike Gonzalez just talked about Gramsci. It was Gramsci who talked about the long march through the institutions. And they're not going to stop at the church. If anything else, that's the ultimate thing that they want to take down. And they're doing it. So they do it with their Trojan horse. Right? They're not going to come at you and say, "Hey, we're here from the Marxist school down the street. We'd like to come here and just destroy your church from within." They're not going to do that, obviously. They're going to come in with very nice sounding little phrases, right? And one of them is Black Lives Matter. Oh, you think Black Lives Matter, right? Of course, Black Lives Matter. Oh, great, then we have a good place in your church here. And then all of a sudden they start talking about Anglo. Okay, so as I'm diving more into this Marxism in the church. I have never heard the word Anglo more in my entire life. Like clips of people talking about Anglo pastors and, oh, this is an Anglo church with an Anglo pastor and Anglo interpretations. And it's like, what are you talking about? Like Anglo-Saxon, we know that term, but I've never heard it used as like a descriptive term for you, right? Like, oh, you're an Anglo. What? Oh yeah, this church has Anglo leadership. It needs black leadership. Anglo leadership? What is that? Anyway, it's not good. All right. So here's an example of how they kind of come at you all soft and people fall for it. So this is a woke Christian here. As a woke Christian Black Lives Matter person talking about one of the tenets of Black Lives Matter. He said, some evangelicals have an issue with the Black Lives Matter organization because one of their core beliefs is to disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families and villages that collectively care for one another. End quote. Here's the thing, though. The nuclear family was a late invention of family relations that only goes back to the last century and only became prevalent in the US from the 1950s onward. Today around the world, cultures have various types of familial relations and stress extended family structures and quasi-familial structures, i.e. villages. Compared to the long line of history, nuclear family as a prescribed norm and ideal is a blip on a map, okay? So this is what Black Lives Matter does. They always give you a little kernel of truth. A little kernel of truth, then go in a completely different direction. To that person, well, here, let's quote the nuclear family thing. I think he pretty much did there, but here's what it says on their website. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. By the way, disrupt is a whole thing, right? Disrupt means a completely different thing than we think. Family structure requirement by supporting each other as extended families in villages that collectively care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. By the way, this is the one that's just before we are a queer affirming network. When we gather, we do so with the intention of freeing ourselves from the tight grip of heteronormative thinking, or rather the belief that all in the world are heterosexual. Okay, so that's quite a 1-2 punch right there. Right, so even if that first thing you're like, oh yeah, the village, I support, everyone should be raised in a village. And then you like read on, you're like, wait, what's that one? All right, so you'd think people would be throwing some flags on the field, but alas, not enough are. Okay, so if the Black Lives Matter people were saying that we need more intergenerational relationships or even intergenerational households, yeah, that's great. Right, pros and cons of that, but on the whole, I would say that's great. I think it's more pro intergenerational households. That's a very good thing. It is a relatively new thing to have kids grow up and then move far away and then raise their families across the country in a very isolated unit. And there's no doubt about that. It's a relatively new phenomenon. We did a segment a couple months ago now. David Brooks wrote a really good article about this, and I think it was in The Atlantic, about the nuclear family and the history of it, and the fact that it's become an ideal is a relatively new phenomenon. So that's fine. Again, there's always a kernel of truth. Ben Sass's book, it's one of my favorite books, called The Vanishing American Adult. It's so good. He talks a lot about intergenerational learning and the importance of kids being around their grandparents. That's not what Black Lives Matter is talking about, right? They're not talking about, oh, kids should spend more time with their grandparents and grandparents more times with their kids. The wisdom that grandparents can learn or can impart upon their kids is so important. No, that's not what they're talking about. What they're talking about is the reality, and they're trying to justify the reality of what we see today, which is no dads. That's what they're talking about. So I'm a nuclear family. I got a mom, dad, 3 kids. But we're also super close to our neighbors, hang out with them like every day. And then we have this amazing church family. So we got this great extended family thing going on in the Slater household. It's awesome. It's one of the greatest blessings of our life. We have our village. Oh, there's a great book by Feline, Council of Dads. Bruce Feline, Bruce Feiler, Council of Dads. It's a TV show on NBC too. I've never seen the TV show. I watched like 10 minutes of it, and it seems really sweet and lovely and nice and all that stuff. So if you've ever seen it, I'd love to know if you think it's any good. But anyway, it's a council of dads, right? He thought he was dying, so he called up, I think it was 5 of his dads, or of his friends who were dads, and each of them, he asked them if he could be on the council of dads and impart a part of wisdom and personality onto his kids when he's gone. He ended up living, but he still has this great council of dads. That's awesome. I got a council of dads. You should definitely put together a council of dads. Have a village to help raise your kids. That's not what Black Lives Matter is talking about. What they're excusing and justifying, because this is what the left does all the time, what they're excusing and justifying is they're harmful, like the worst thing in our culture, arguably, and excusing the single mom, 4 kids, 4 different dads, all the dads nowhere to be seen. That's what they're trying to justify. That's what Black Lives Matter calls disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family structure. There's no village there. And if there is a village, there's no men in the village. That's the thing. There's no dads in that village. That's the problem. I just read this the other day. Can I find this in 10 seconds live on the TV here? Boom. How about that? Beautiful. All right, this is, what's her name? Talib. What's her first name? Whatever. She's one of the squad members. Rashida, is that it? I don't know where she said this, but she just said this the other day. She said, I'll tell you, I grew up in the most beautiful, blackest city. I didn't get raised by only my mother. I got raised by the mothers down the block, predominantly African-American women. Okay, where are the men? Where are the dads? Where's the council of dads? Where's the, I didn't just get raised by my family, I got raised by all the other families. And no dads, just the women. That to me seems like the problem. I got 2 minutes here. Ben Franklin, he wrote this really great piece. I think he wrote it in France, in French, actually. 1784. It's called Remarks Concerning the Savages of North America. Ooh, sounds racist. Quite the opposite. Ben Franklin was making the point that our cultures are different, right? The American culture and the Indian culture are different, but in many ways, the Indians have a better one. And here's one thing he wrote. He said, Ben Franklin, the Indian men, when they're young, are hunters and warriors. When old, counselors. For all their government is by the counsel and advice of their sages, the older wise men. There's no force, there are no prisons, no officers to compel obedience or inflict punishment. Hence, they generally study oratory, the best speaker having the most influence. The Indian women till the ground, dress the food, nurse and bring up the children, and preserve and hand down to posterity the memory of public transactions. So what you hear there in that village, the native village there, you got your mothers, you got your fathers, you got your grandparents, passing down wisdom to the children. That's the village. Everyone, men, women, not 4 kids, 4 different fathers, living on welfare without a church family and the government there to survive off of. That's not healthy. But that's what Black Lives Matter is talking about. That's what they're justifying. And they want mom and kids solely under the care and protection of the state. That's the village they're talking about. So you see the difference? Right, so you got this woke Christian who's like, oh, hey, whoa. No. They just want everyone to be raised in a village. No. They want everyone raised by the government with no men. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Cider Crusaders, I want to give another example of what we talked about 2 days ago and a little bit yesterday as well. Remember we talked about this website, beautifulrising.org and beautifultrouble.org. So these are websites for these rioters and these protesters that give all these different examples. There's tons of them on different rioting and protesting techniques. So we went over 4. I just picked 4 random ones. And once you know them, you see them all over the place. You see what they're doing. So real quick, it's they call it a decision dilemma. We call it a double bind. Trump does it all the time. So Trump's classic double bind that he does at rallies, which I'm sad that we're probably not going to be able to see this year. Okay, real quick, before we even do this. Think about what we'd be doing right now if there was no COVID. Right? There'd be rallies all over the place. There'd be campaign ads. I haven't even heard a local campaign ad at all. I haven't gotten a local mailer. I haven't gotten any local election anything. Election's like coming up here soon. I saw a video the other day of, it was Trump. Someone songified Trump's rally speech about walking down the ramp. And it felt so good because like that's all the stuff we would be having right now if it weren't for COVID, which then turned all this Black Lives Matter stuff. Like the alternate reality where there's no COVID is way, way more fun, which is a bummer. But anyway, we get no rallies, so Trump doesn't do the double bind of, oh, look at the fake news media here. They won't even turn their cameras around to show the size of the crowd. They won't even do it. Right, so the media is they're there with their cameras. I don't know why this is a camera, but they're there with their cameras and they're in a double bind. They either show the crowd, right? They either show this massive crowd, which is what Trump wants, or they don't, and then they're the fake news media who won't show the massive crowd, right? So double bind, everyone uses it, but the protesters do as well. That's the first thing. Second is the real action is your target's reaction. The real action is your target's reaction. Remember we talked about goading yesterday. Third thing is do the media's job for them. And then the fourth was lead with sympathetic characters. So the example we gave yesterday was one of the Congress people at the Barr hearings. And you know, anytime the Democrats asked Barr a question and he tried to answer it, all the Democrats said, oh, reclaiming my time, sir. And then the woman we played yesterday said, wow, I am shocked at your disrespect for members of Congress. Wow, I reclaim my time, right? It's just like total nonsense. But all of it was in an effort to goad and frustrate Barr to try to get a rise out of him, right? You get that reaction, and then, because that's always the main goal, and then the Democrats can package that up for the media, do the media's job for them, and then they can use that as a tool to attack the president, right? So they're just looking for, out of 8 hours of hearings, they're looking for 1 or 2 little sound bites. And whatever. Barr's good, so I don't know if they got many, but anyway, so that's what we did yesterday. I got another example here. And again, they're all over the place. The entire federal response to Seattle and Portland, right? The rioters want the federal authorities. From the jump, they wanted the federal authorities to come in so that they can look like the victims, right? The media does their job, calling them peaceful protesters the whole time. This is that ABC News tweet that got some play the other day. It says, protesters in California set fire to a courthouse, damaged a police station, and assaulted officers after a peaceful demonstration intensified. Right? So they're doing their part, right? Gaslighting. All Trump is doing, okay? All he's doing is using federal law enforcement, all within the law, to protect federal property and officers, which would be entirely unnecessary if the local authorities did their job. But they don't want to, right? The rioters don't want the local authorities to do their job, and the local authorities don't want to do their job because they all want Trump to react so that they can then call him a tyrant. That's all they want. They wanted the federal troops to come in so that they can say, oh, this is Trump's America. No, it's not. It's the America you are encouraging. It's the America you created. Trump's trying to stop it. This is I saw this Larry Tribe quote. Here it is. This is Larry Tribe he's a Harvard professor. He says, Trump's tactics, it's Trump's tactics, right? The reaction, it's always the reaction, conjure memories of Argentina in the 70s or El Salvador in the 80s, with, quote, almost daily reports of kidnappings and killings carried out by what were chillingly described as heavily armed men. Killings? What are you talking about? Daily killings? I mean, last I checked, it was like 20 people have been killed in the riots, but not from law enforcement, and not even from federal law enforcement, not from any law enforcement. All the killings are from other rioters. What are you talking about? But Larry Tribe's a total hack. It's not just him. These are a bunch of different headlines. So New Yorker, America is a country besieged by its own president. See, it's Trump's thing. Mercifully, Trump's law and order gambit hasn't led to any fatalities yet. But Mayor Wheeler has warned, my biggest fear is that somebody's going to die. Do you get the feeling that they're almost kind of rooting for it? Boston Globe, Trump's Portland tactics are the stuff we decry in other countries. I don't know. I don't think I've decried another country for protecting federal property from rioters. I don't know, maybe I have. The Atlantic, the president is deploying the kind of performative authoritarianism that Vladimir Putin pioneered. That's good, bring Putin into it. Any rank amateur could have predicted that unprepared troops with guns would increase tension and prolong the crisis. First of all, where's the unprepared part come in? Who says these troops are unprepared? What does that mean? And I also love her use of the word tension, right? That the rioters and all the riots going on, it was just a little tension. That's all. It wasn't rioting. It wasn't violence. It was a little tension. And then the president came in and escalated. His fault. Philadelphia Inquirer, Trump's made-for-TV fascism in Portland won't get him reelected. It may get someone killed. Again, I think they want that to happen, it sounds like. Now, it's worth noting, none of these writers, whoever wrote all this nonsense, none of these people actually fear that America is a fascist country. They don't really fear this. They just hate Trump. And they'll say anything to get their power back. But they don't really fear it's a fascist country, because if it was a fascist country, you couldn't say stuff like that. If it was a fascist country, then Trump's stormtroopers would come knocking on their door and take them away to an education camp. But not even a hint of fear of that whatsoever. They just want to get their power back, and they don't care how many casualties they have to inflict upon the way. Truth being one of the biggest casualties. It is by any means necessary. But just to drive it home, you see how the rioters are setting this up perfectly? They're doing all these techniques perfectly. They're putting Trump in a double bind, where Trump, no matter what he does, right? He doesn't do anything, and the cities burn. And then the left comes in and says, oh, look at the president not doing anything to stop the right? Right? Oh, look at what he's done to these cities, and look how this is Trump's America. Or they call in the federal troops, which escalates the tension. And then they say, oh, look at Trump's America. See it? These rioters, they make the content for the media, which the media gleefully shares, and then roots for even more destruction because they get more eyeballs, and then gaslight us all with this like, oh, it's the wall of moms. It's the wall of moms. That's it. What's the big? Oh, what are you so upset about? Look at this beautiful wall of moms, as if it's just like Oprah's book club gathering that Trump's just randomly tear gassing. Right? So don't fall for the tricks. Tomorrow, we got our big special. I'm really excited about this. This is the official kickoff for a theme that we're going to talk a lot about. Weeks now, we've been talking about Marxism and postmodernism and how we see it, and critical theory, and how we see it manifesting in many, many different ways, whether it's education, higher education, K through 12, math class, just race relations in America, everything. We're going to take that and talk about how it's infiltrating the church, how Marxism and critical theory is infiltrating the church, and why that's very bad. And I'll just say this. We have great guests. It's going to be an amazing show. And we're going to talk about this for weeks to come, too, so get ready for it. All you have to do is look at the fruit. Look at the fruit of Karl Marx. Look at the fruit of Marxism. You have 100 million people dead, okay? Marxism is bad politically. It's even worse as a theology. But so many people, so many Christians trying to be inclusive and nice and not bigoted are like, oh yeah, no, this is great, come on in. That's a terrible, awful thing, a terrible thing. Maybe the most destructive thing that could happen with this Marxist infusion into everything. All right, so that's the special tomorrow, 11 o'clock Eastern. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word.